I thought my mother-in-law was just controlling. Then I discovered she was stealing everything behind my back. When I first met Reed, I wasn't looking for anyone serious, and he definitely wasn't what I expected. He was funny in that offbeat, completely unaware kind of way that made him seem incapable of lying. And for a while, I believed that. I was 34, careful with everything. My time, my energy, especially my money. I've been raised by a single dad who didn't have much, so I learned early that peace costs money, and you can't afford to be stupid with either. Reed was different from anyone I'd dated before. So laid back, borderline careless, but not in a reckless way, more like someone who always trusted that things would work out somehow. I used to admire that about him, until I realized it was just irresponsibility with better packaging. His mother, Lorraine, was a different story. From the first moment I met her, something about her energy scratched at me like wool under your skin. She smiled, sure, but never with her eyes. The first time I shook her hand, she held it a beat too long and said, "You're the one with the financial degree, right? Smart girl." Her voice was warm, but the words left a cold smear behind them. I told myself it was just awkwardness, nerves, the usual tension between a mother and the woman her son brought home. But the way she watched me like I was a chess piece she couldn't quite place, that wasn't nerves. That was calculation. We got married within 2 years. I had a solid job in data analytics, decent retirement accounts, and a six-figure savings cushion built from years of sacrificing vacations, clothes, nights out, anything I couldn't justify twice. Reed had debt, a lot of it, but never seemed ashamed of it. "You're good at money," he'd say with a grin. Like that meant I should just absorb it without question. I didn't. We agreed to keep separate accounts until we bought a house. When we finally did, I put down most of the down payment, and we signed together. I thought we were building something equal, even if I carried more of the weight. At first, the shifts were subtle, barely noticeable changes in how Reed talked about finances. He'd bring up joint goals in vague, sweeping terms, saying things like married money is family money, with a tone that felt more rehearsed than heartfelt. I didn't push back right away. I wanted to believe he was just adjusting to married life. But then I found out he refinanced a portion of our mortgage without telling me. When I confronted him, he brushed it off like it was a paperwork formality, just an interest rate change, nothing important. He made me feel like questioning it was overkill, so I let it go. That was my mistake. I was still trying to convince myself everything was fine when the real bomb dropped. One ordinary Thursday morning, I woke up to make coffee, sat at the kitchen table like always, and tried to check my account just out of habit. The app wouldn't let me in. My login worked, but every time I clicked on my savings, it flashed a red warning saying access restricted. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I refreshed, logged out, waited a few hours, and tried again. Same thing. So I called the bank, half annoyed, half curious. The woman on the other end was polite but stiff. She said a restriction had been placed due to a power of attorney update, and my heart stuttered at those words. I told her I hadn't given anyone power of attorney. She double-checked and said the form had been submitted and notarized 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I was in the hospital after a migraine so severe I couldn't speak clearly, let alone write. Reed had taken me in and stayed while they gave me fluids and ran scans. I remembered signing the admission form, my hand barely holding the pen. The idea that someone had forged my signature while I was in that state made me physically sick. I asked the woman on the phone to send me a copy of the document. She agreed, and I spent the next hour pacing the kitchen, checking my inbox every 5 seconds. When the PDF finally landed, I printed it and stared at it so long my eyes blurred. It was my signature, my name, my handwriting, down to the weird slant I do on the first letter of my name. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. I called Reed, trying to stay calm, trying to convince myself there had to be some explanation. He didn't pick up at first. When he finally called back, I said, "My bank app's locked. Did you do something?" There was a pause. Then he said, "Mom moved a few things around. For our future." I asked, "What do you mean she moved things?" And he said, "We talked about it. You weren't feeling great, so she helped organize stuff. Nothing shady. She's just better at this." I whispered, "I didn't sign anything." His tone changed. Defensive. You did. I was there. You agreed. You were a little out of it, but we did everything right. I didn't argue. I set the phone down and let him keep talking until he realized I wasn't answering anymore. That afternoon, I drove to the bank in person. I brought my ID, pulled up old documents with my verified signature, and asked to see the original. It was mine, but only the signature. Everything else had been typed, arranged, prepared by someone else. Someone who had access to my personal data. Someone who knew how to make it look right. That someone was Lorraine. I started digging quietly. I requested account statements, set up notifications, pulled down transaction histories, and found that bit by bit, money had been leaving my savings account over the last few months. Not large amounts, just enough to not set off any alerts. Just enough to stay under the radar. But the total was in the tens of thousands. I also discovered a second checking account I had never opened, one with my name second on the list and Reed's name first. That account had activity, transfers, payments. My money moved around like it didn't belong to me. Everything was legal, technically, because of that one document. I started checking other things. The mortgage documents, the insurance, even the title on our car. All had been adjusted recently. Some of the paperwork had my name, but the handwriting wasn't mine. When I confronted Reed again, he acted like I was being paranoid. You said you trusted me, he said. This is marriage. This is for life. You're acting like I stole something. I looked him in the eye and said, You did. He didn't respond. Just left the room. That was 2 months ago. I didn't scream. I didn't tell anyone. I just started preparing. Slowly, quietly. I moved what was left of my savings into a new account under a different name. I got a P.O. box in Akron, talked to an attorney, and told her I needed options. Every Sunday, I still sat across from Lorraine at dinner, still listened to her fake little jokes, still watched her smile at me like she'd already won. She had no idea I was watching everything now, waiting for the moment I'd push back. And I swear to God, when I do, she's going to feel every inch of it. A week after I started meeting with the lawyer, I began recording everything. Not secretly, not yet anyway, just quietly enough to make them think I was still asleep to it all. I kept a small notebook tucked in the lining of my purse, and any time Reed said something that felt slightly off, even if it sounded harmless in the moment, I'd write it down with the date, the exact words, and how he looked when he said it. I even noted when his tone didn't match his face, when his smiles stopped meeting his eyes, and especially the days when Lorraine showed up unannounced and left me feeling like the walls of my own home weren't mine anymore. At first, it was hard to believe someone I married could be capable of something so invasive, so thoroughly violating, but the more I uncovered, the more impossible it became to see him as anything other than a participant. Maybe not the mastermind, but definitely not innocent. And Lorraine? She wasn't hiding anymore. She'd waltz in with Tupperware and files, lay them out across the dining table like she owned the place, and talk about simplifying responsibilities with this smugness that made my stomach turn. One afternoon, she brought a labeled plastic bin and said it was for my financial clarity. Inside were credit card applications, forms for joint assets, even a pre-written letter addressed to herself, but designed to look like I'd written it, thanking her for her help. Her handwriting mimicked mine just enough to scare me. I smiled like I didn't notice, told her I'd look through it later, and scanned every sheet after she left. I backed them up on a flash drive I wore around my neck, just in case they ever decided to lose my laptop or dig through my drawers again. Then, something happened I wasn't prepared for. I came home early from work. It was supposed to be a long Friday, but my boss let us leave after lunch. I parked in the driveway and noticed Reed's car wasn't out front, which made sense until I walked inside and found his key fob on the kitchen counter. For a second, I thought maybe he forgot it, but something about the stillness in the house made my skin tighten. I didn't call out. I moved slowly, listening. That's when I heard the creak of the back patio door and the soft murmur of voices. I walked to the hallway leading toward the kitchen, heart pounding, footsteps light, and stood just behind the corner, out of sight but close enough to hear every word. Reed's voice first, casual, smug, too familiar. He said, "She hasn't questioned anything. I think she really believes this was all her idea." Lorraine laughed. Not her usual brittle social laugh, but the deep, genuine one I'd only heard when she was fully in control. Then she said the words that nearly stopped my heart. You need to keep her calm until the refinance clears. Once that's done, she can leave for all I care. I backed away before they saw me, heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to warn me to run. I walked out the front door, slammed it louder than usual, and came in like I just arrived. Reed greeted me with that same practice kiss on the cheek, and Lorraine blinked like she was surprised to see me home early. We ate lunch like nothing had happened. I nodded and smiled through every bite, already knowing what I'd be doing that night. I waited until they were both asleep and then dug into our shared desktop, which we'd once used for wedding planning and budgeting, in a folder labeled 2011 Budget Review, which made no sense because it was 2013. I found a series of PDFs, loan documents, refinance paperwork, scan agreements. Some pages had what looked like my initials in the corners, but they weren't mine. Closed, deliberate forgeries built from watching me sign holiday cards and rent checks. They were using my income, my credit, my name to pull more money out of the house I paid into with my life savings. These new loan terms would increase our monthly payment and strip away nearly every bit of equity left. I knew what they were doing. They were trying to drain every financial resource they could access before I left, or worse, make it impossible for me to leave without walking away with debt chained to my name. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and counted every lie that had led us here. Every time I talked myself out of pushing back, every moment I'd ignored the voice in my head that whispered, "This isn't normal." By sunrise, I had made up my mind. I called my brother, Cal, and I hadn't spoken in years. Not really, since our dad died. We didn't have a falling out, just a slow, mutual drift. But I knew he worked in mortgage lending in Milwaukee and figured if anyone could help me understand just how screwed I was, it would be him. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. Enough to make him take me seriously. Enough for his tone to shift mid-call from cautious brother to professional. He told me that once a refinance is finalized, especially one with my signature, even if forged, it becomes a legal nightmare to untangle. He said if I could prove fraud or show that I was manipulated into signing under duress, I might have a chance. A small one. Then he said something I didn't expect. Whatever you do, don't leave the house. Not yet. I didn't understand at first. He explained that if I walked away now, they could claim abandonment in court, that I'd be giving up my right to protect what was legally mine. If I stayed, I could defend my financial interest and hold on to the physical evidence. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and thanked him. I was still scared, but now I had a plan. That week, Reed started acting different. Not violent, not outwardly aggressive, just tighter, more invasive. He began insisting on seeing my phone just to make sure you're not being misled. He reset the Wi-Fi password without telling me. He started intercepting the mail before I could get to it. He said it was just junk anyway, but I saw the tension in his hands when I asked. It wasn't concern. It was control. And Lorraine, she became even bolder. She rearranged things in my kitchen like it was her own, replaced the labels on my spice jars. Once I walked in and she was reorganizing my filing drawer, smiling like it was the most normal thing in the world. When I asked her what she was doing, she said, "Just tidying up your roll. It's good to stay on top of these things." That night, I locked the drawer and hid the key. One day, she brought over another folder, saying it was just some helpful records. Inside were credit card applications under my name, inquiries I never made, and a handwritten note addressed to Reed for me thanking him for trusting Lorraine to manage our future. The handwriting was her attempt at mine, and it was close enough to pass if you weren't paying attention. I scanned everything, uploaded it all to a private cloud drive under a fake account. Cal told me to keep collecting. He said, "You've got enough to start a fire, but if you want to win, you need to burn down the whole house." So I waited. I watched. And then, 2 weeks ago, I found a thing that changed everything. Buried deep in a folder labeled Vacation Pics 2020 were scanned pages of a journal. Not mine, Lorraine's. Dozens of entries, each one written in her cramped, slanted script, detailing everything from her suspicions about me to her step-by-step manipulation plan. She referred to me as the naive one, said she coached Reed on how to keep me feeling safe. Act affectionate, be consistent. Let her think she's steering. One line made me freeze. I never thought he'd find someone so easy to manage. His father would be proud. I closed the file and stared at the screen for a long time. That was the moment I stopped feeling afraid. After I found the scans of Lorraine's journal buried inside that mislabeled folder, something inside me hardened like cooling steel. Something permanent. I didn't feel shocked anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't even pace. I just backed up the entire folder twice. Once on my flash drive, once on a hidden cloud server with two-factor authentication. Then deleted the original copies from the desktop and cleared the recycle bin so thoroughly you'd think I'd never even touched the files. I was done pretending I was confused. I wasn't confused. I was at war. I started working faster after that, but still careful. I got a second laptop. Cheap. No frills, bought in cash. I stopped using the shared desktop entirely, claimed I was having trouble with it. Let Reed think I'd gotten frustrated and stopped bothering. I carried the new one everywhere. I never left anything important on it. Every file I opened, I backed up and encrypted. My lawyer, Janelle, told me that if they suspected I was building a case, they might accelerate whatever plan they had, and if they felt control slipping, they'd tighten the leash hard. She was right. A few mornings later, I noticed Reed's key fob was still on the counter, even though his car wasn't in the driveway. At first, I thought he must have forgotten it, but then I glanced out the front window and saw his car parked down the block almost 2 houses away. Something about that detail, the deliberate distance, made my pulse skip. I waited. I didn't move too fast. I didn't call his name. I listened. The house was quiet for a long time until I heard the faint metallic click of the back shed door. That shed was mine. My garden tools, my father's old toolbox, a few file boxes I kept locked. I walked softly through the house, grabbed my keys from the bowl by the door, and stepped outside like I was going to water the herbs. I crept around the side of the house, heart in my throat, then opened the shed door without warning. Reed flinched like I'd caught him robbing a bank. He stammered something about looking for the garden hose attachment, but I saw the crowbar in his hand and a lock he'd clearly busted off one of my boxes. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I just said, "You should leave the shed, and you should leave the house." He stared at me for a second, searching for a version of me that didn't exist anymore, then said, "This is my house too." I looked him in the eye and said, "Not for long." Something shifted in his expression right then. The edge of confidence he used to wear like armor cracked. He asked, "You've been talking to someone, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, I checked the flash drive I kept in the pocket of my coat. It was gone. I'd hidden it in a zippered lining, something I checked every morning before work like a ritual. But now it was missing, and I knew he'd gone through my things. I sprinted to my laptop, logged in, and checked the backup folder in the cloud. Still there. Every photo, every file, every forged signature. They hadn't deleted the truth. They just tried to erase my access to it. That was when I realized how much danger I was in. Not physical, not yet, but the kind of quiet, deliberate danger that comes when people believe they've already won and just need to finish covering their tracks. I called Janelle the next morning, told her everything. The fake documents, the journal, the shed, the missing flash drive. She didn't hesitate. "You need to file for a restraining order, and you need to do it now." We filed the paperwork within 24 hours. It was still pending, but I didn't wait. I packed a small bag and started staying at a coworker's place. Madeline, someone I trusted, someone who didn't ask too many questions. I left Reed a single note. "I need space to think. Please don't contact me." He didn't reply, but the next morning, a letter showed up at Madeline's doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single photocopied page, the power of attorney form. Across it, written in thick black Sharpie, were 3 words. You signed it. No name, no explanation, no threats, but I knew exactly who had sent it. Lorraine had finally shown her hand, and the message was crystal clear. Not only did she know where I was, but she wanted me to understand that I would never outrun what they'd done. That even now, she believed she was untouchable. I showed the letter to Janelle. She frowned and said, "This is intimidation. Document it. Log everything. She's trying to scare you into silence." But what Lorraine didn't understand was that silence wasn't my refuge anymore. It was my weapon. That night, I sat down with every file, every folder, every screenshot, and started building something they couldn't destroy, a full timeline beginning to end. I labeled every piece, organized it by date, flagged all suspicious transactions. I printed out copies of every forged document, highlighted every section where my signature had been faked, scanned the journal pages again, and compiled recordings from the days Lorraine came over and said things like, "You're finally fitting into your role," or "We all have to make sacrifices in marriage." And then I took it to the police. I didn't walk in with tears or shaking hands. I walked in with a briefcase full of proof and a list of names. The officer at the front desk asked if I had something to report. I said yes. Financial fraud, coercion, and abuse of power of attorney. He raised his eyebrows, called for someone from the investigative unit, and 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from a detective who didn't roll his eyes or tell me to calm down. He just listened. He flipped through the documents slowly, frowned at the fake signatures, and nodded as I explained the timeline. By the end of the meeting, he said, "We'll open an investigation. This isn't nothing." That same evening, I had Reed served with legal notice. He opened the door, looked at the papers, and didn't even try to pretend he was surprised. All he said was, "You didn't have to go this far." I looked him in the face and said, "You're right. I should have gone further." He didn't say anything else. He packed 2 suitcases the next day and left without saying goodbye. 3 days later, Lorraine got her subpoena. That's when she called me. For the first time in 6 years, she didn't bother pretending. No fake worms. No polite phrasing. Just screaming, furious, bitter, snarling. She called me trash, accused me of tearing her family apart. And then she said something I will never forget. "You think they're going to care about your word against mine? I've been doing this longer than you've been alive." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I said, "They don't need my word." I brought receipts. And then I hung up. After Lorraine's phone call, I waited for the next punch to land, but nothing happened for days. No messages, no new threats, no unexpected knocks at the door. The silence was eerie, like the air just before a storm rolls in. I spent every night at Madeline's, locking my bag in her guest closet, sleeping with one eye open, and checking the street each morning to make sure no familiar cars were parked nearby. The investigation was officially underway, but I knew these things took time, and in the space between filing charges and seeing results, anything could still happen. I stayed low, worked remotely when I could, and avoided logging into anything that might reveal my location. Still, I checked my phone constantly. I waited for the moment something cracked open wider, and when it did, it was almost anticlimactic. Janelle texted me on a Tuesday morning, short and direct. "Police found discrepancies in the notary's log. We're moving forward." My fingers trembled just reading it. I asked what that meant, and she called instead of texting. The notary who supposedly witnessed my power of attorney signature had a history, a complaint filed the year prior about unverified documentation, a case that had quietly disappeared after a settlement. It wasn't enough to convict outright, but it poked a hole in the one piece of evidence Lorraine thought she had locked down. That forged signature no longer looked clean. It looked like what it was, a fake dressed up in legitimacy. The detective handling my case called the next day to tell me they'd expanded the investigation to include Lorraine's past records, real estate, inheritance disputes, and especially her late husband's life insurance claim, which was flagged as inconsistent by the issuing company but never reviewed. That's when Reed called me, and for the first time, he sounded like someone who knew the walls were closing in. His voice was thinner, like all the power had drained out of it. He said he hadn't known the full extent of what Lorraine had done. Said he believed she was protecting the family. He stammered through excuses, claimed he'd only followed her lead, that he didn't know about the forged papers. I let him talk, let him run out of air. Then I said, "You didn't stop her either. You didn't protect me." There was a long silence on the line. Then, quietly, he said, "I lost everything." I replied, "So did I. The difference is I didn't throw anyone under the bus to keep it." That was the last time we spoke. The next 2 weeks unfolded like dominoes falling in slow motion. Lorraine tried to spin the situation by filing a counterclaim, accusing me of coercion and fraud, as if I had manipulated Reed into giving me control over the finances. But she had no documents, no signatures, no witnesses. Everything she claimed could be disproven with a 5-minute timeline comparison. The most dangerous people are the ones who believe their own lies. And Lorraine had been lying for so long. She thought reality would bend to her version. It didn't. While the case built momentum, I started preparing to leave the city for good. I knew I couldn't stay, not because I was running, but because I needed a clean break. I cashed out what little remained of my retirement account. Not because I was desperate, but because I didn't want a single cent of my new life tied to anything they'd touched. I cut every shared account, canceled every card with Reed's name on it, and contacted my bank to have my credit monitored. I found a small condo outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. Nothing fancy, but clean, quiet, and mine. The down payment cleared 3 weeks after I wired the funds. That same week, Lorraine's accounts were flagged by the fraud division of the state attorney's office. The investigation had uncovered multiple past transactions that mirrored the pattern in my case: suspicious transfers, last-minute paperwork updates, unverified signatures. One, disturbingly, was tied to her sister-in-law, who had contested the legitimacy of Lorraine's control over her late husband's will more than a decade earlier. That case had gone nowhere at the time, buried under a pile of civil filings and family grief, but now it was back in the spotlight, and it wasn't looking good for Lorraine. Reed's name appeared on most of the recent financial transfers. His handwriting was on the forms. His bank account had received funds directly from mine. Whether or not he'd signed those papers with full knowledge, he'd still benefited from them. Janelle warned me that while he might not face the same charges Lorraine would, he wasn't walking away untouched. There was talk of joint liability, restitution, maybe more if prosecutors could prove intent. Meanwhile, I started building something new. I set up my new condo with furniture I bought secondhand from a family-run shop that delivered everything in one trip. I got a new phone, a new number, and a post office box for anything official. I changed the locks myself. I even planted herbs in the window like I had in the house before everything went dark. But this time, I didn't look over my shoulder while doing it. I hadn't spoken to anyone in Reed's family since the subpoena was served, but one morning, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was short. "Check your mail." No name. No follow-up. I went to the post office later that afternoon, and inside my box was a letter with no return address. Inside was a single page, written in careful script. It said, "You destroyed him. Are you proud?" I folded it once, didn't bother reading it again, and handed it to Janelle the next day. She wasn't surprised. She's losing control. Expect more. Don't respond. That night, I went online for the first time in weeks. Not for anything legal, not for checking statements. Just curiosity. I checked Reed's social media, then Lorraine's. Both were scrubbed. Posts gone. Comments closed. Mutuals had started pulling back, removing tags, distancing themselves like rats leaving a sinking ship. And then, without planning it, I typed Lorraine's name into a public records database. I didn't expect anything. But a new entry had posted that day. Formal fraud charges pending investigation, with multiple counts listed. I exhaled so sharply I startled myself. All this time, I thought I'd have to keep fighting just to be believed. But here it was, in writing, in black and white. They weren't invincible. They weren't untouchable. And they sure as hell weren't done answering for what they did. The first time I stood alone in my new place and realized no one else had a key, I cried without meaning to. Not the kind of sobbing people picture when someone's hurt, but the quiet, sudden kind, like my body finally remembered what it felt like to exhale. No one knew my address. No one could unlock my door. For the first time in years, everything around me was mine because I built it, not because someone else allowed me to have it. I didn't wait for Reed or Lorraine to try again. I closed the accounts, blocked the numbers, shredded the old documents, and started fresh. I didn't even bother saving photos from before. What would be the point of keeping images that would only remind me how good I was at pretending everything was fine? I left the rings behind, not because they didn't matter, but because I didn't want to carry a single symbol that meant loyalty to people who didn't know what the word meant. A month after I moved, the county court mailed me a formal letter acknowledging my cooperation in an active fraud investigation. Charges were still pending, but they were no longer a question of if. The evidence I provided had forced the right hands to move. Janelle told me this kind of case often took years to fully unravel, especially when people like Lorraine had experience hiding behind legal smoke. But it didn't matter. My part was done. The system would take it from here. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but what I actually felt was tired. I spent so long holding my breath, I'd forgotten what it meant to feel safe in my own skin. It didn't come back all at once. Some mornings I still wake up expecting the worst. But now, when that panic hits, I remind myself that I got out. I wasn't rescued. I rescued myself. And for someone they thought would stay quiet forever, that's the loudest thing I could have done.